The cantina on Nexus Prime reeked of synthetic alcohol and desperation. Blue smoke drifted through the air like ghosts of forgotten battles. Commander Zethkar flexed his 4 scarred arms as he stared into his drink, compound eyes reflecting. The dim neon lights that flickered against the metal walls. 20 cycles had passed since the war ended. But the nightmares remained fresh as yesterday's wounds. The establishment buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and war veterans from dozens of species. Vorthok soldiers nursed their drinks. In silence, their chitinous armor bearing the scars of battles they'd rather forget. Ethereal merchants floated near the ceiling, their translucent forms shimmering with anxiety. Even the mechanical synthesis units seemed more subdued than usual, their optical sensors dimmed with what might have been electronic melancholy. "Commander?" The young ethereal reporter's voice trembled like a leaf in a solar storm. His name was Veltar, fresh from the Academy of Galactic Communications. Eager to make his mark with a story that would shake the foundations of everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare, Zethkar didn't look up from his glass. The amber liquid inside swirled with memories of plasma fire and screaming metal. His reflection stared back at him, showing the deep scars that ran across his exoskeleton like a map of every battle he'd survived. The left side of his face was a patchwork of regenerated chitin, courtesy of a human explosive device that had nearly ended his existence. "Will you tell me about the humans?" Veltar pressed, his tentacles curling nervously around his recording device. The cantina seemed to grow quieter at the mention of that word. Humans, even now. Cycles after the armistice, the name carried weight throughout the galaxy. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Drinks paused halfway to mouths. Everyone had heard stories, but few had faced them in battle and lived to tell about it. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like the closing of a tomb. "Which part?"
"Oh.
"We thought they'd surrender after the first orbital bombardment? Or how we learned that humans consider extinction just another obstacle to overcome?" The reporter activated his recording device with shaking tentacles. The small device hummed to life, its sensors ready to capture every word of what would become the most important interview in galactic history. "It began with arrogance," Zethkar continued, his voice carrying the weight of a warrior who had seen too much. "The Galactic Council detected their primitive radio signals and dismissed them as recently evolved mammals. We listened to their transmissions, their music, their crude entertainment programs. We laughed at their simple mathematics, their basic understanding of physics." He gestured with one scarred arm toward the viewport that showed the star-filled void beyond the station. 300 species in the coalition, each one convinced of their superiority. The Vorthok had our military might perfected over millennia of conquest. The ethereals possessed psychic abilities that could crush minds from across star systems. The synthesis had technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level. The veteran's compound eyes fixed on something beyond the cantina walls, seeing battles that existed now only in memory. We expected to add Earth to our collection of subjugated worlds within one solar cycle. Their weapons were chemical propellants and primitive nuclear devices. Their ships couldn't even break the light barrier without tearing themselves apart. A bitter laugh escaped his throat, a sound like grinding metal. We sent the 4th Reconnaissance Fleet to their system. 12 ships, each one capable of glassing a continent. The mission was supposed to be a simple show of force, followed by immediate surrender negotiations. Zethkar paused, watching the amber liquid swirl in his glass like a miniature galaxy. The silence stretched until even the cantina's background hum seemed too loud. "The first human ship we encountered was called the Soul's Pride, a primitive vessel by our standards, held together with what they called steel and ceramic composites. It should have been scrap metal against our plasma cannons." His voice dropped too barely above a whisper. Captain Park commanded it, a female with steel in her voice and fire in her eyes. When Admiral Kor demanded surrender, she responded with, "Coordinates?" "Coordinates?" Veltar asked, his recording device capturing every nuance of the conversation. "To our homeworlds, She told us exactly where she planned to send our remains. Zethkar's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to chill. The air around them, Vorthok Prime, Ethereal Sanctum, Synthesis Core. She recited the coordinates with perfect precision, down to the orbital mechanics. The reporter's tentacles twitched with nervousness. But surely that was impossible. How could a primitive species know such classified information? Zethkar's mandibles clicked again, this time with something that might have been respect. That's what we thought. Bravado from a species facing extinction. We were wrong. Dead wrong. He lifted the glass to his mouth, draining the synthetic. Alcohol in one gulp. Liquid burned, but nothing compared to the burning memory of what came next. Admiral Kor ordered the Soul's Pride destroyed. A single plasma lance should have vaporized it instantly. Instead, the ship's hull absorbed the energy and redirected it back at us. Our own weapons turned against us by technology we didn't understand. The cantina fell silent, except for the hum of recycled air and the distant thrum of the station's engines. Even the mechanical synthesis units had stopped their quiet conversations. Optical sensors focused on the veteran's words. That was when we learned our first lesson about humans, Zethkar said, his voice carrying across the room like a funeral dirge. They don't just fight wars, they redefine what war means. He set the empty glass down with a clink that seemed to echo through the silence. Captain Park's ship didn't just survive our attack, he counterattacked. With weapons we'd never seen before, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Beltar leaned forward, his recording device capturing every word. What happened next? Zethkar's compound eyes reflected the neon lights like fractured mirrors. Next, we learned that humans had been preparing for this moment for their entire evolutionary history. Every war they'd fought, every conflict they'd survived, had been practice for the day when something would try to wipe them out. The veterans. Voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration mixed with terror. And we had just volunteered to be their final exam. The Battle of Kepler-44 to be changed everything. Zethkar's voice carried the weight of memory as he gestured for another drink from the cantina's automated server. The mechanical arm delivered the synthetic alcohol with clinical precision. Nothing could wash away what he'd witnessed on that distant world. I was a field commander then, leading the 3rd Assault Wing. 47 ships, each one bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon in half. We outnumbered the human defenders 10-1. His compound eyes stared into the swirling amber liquid. Those numbers meant nothing. The reporter leaned forward, recording device humming softly as other patrons in the cantina pretended not to listen. Even the synthesis units had dimmed their optical sensors, their mechanical forms somehow conveying the weight of anticipated horror. Kepler-442b was a mining world, nothing special by galactic standards. Rocky terrain, thin atmosphere, valuable ore deposits beneath the surface. The humans had been there for maybe 20 of their years, digging tunnels and extracting resources with primitive equipment. Zethkar paused, watching the neon lights reflect off his scarred exoskeleton. We expected to find terrified colonists, hiding in their underground facilities. Instead, we found something else entirely. The veteran's mandibles clicked as he remembered the orbital approach. Their commander was a human named Kim, a male with scars covering half his face. Battle damage from their own wars, we learned later. When we opened communications to demand surrender, he smiled. Zethkar's compound eyes flickered with something that might have been fear. Humans smile when they're about to do something terrible. It's not like our threat displays or the ethereal psychic emanations. It's quiet, almost gentle. That makes it worse somehow. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted, as if the very air was holding its breath. Kim's response was simple. He said, "Welcome to hell, friends. We've been preparing for you." Then he cut the transmission. Zethkar's voice dropped to barely above a W. Hisper. That's when the mining explosives started going off. The reporter's tentacles twitched nervously. Mining explosives? The humans had spent months turning their entire operation into a weapon. Every tunnel, every shaft, every processing. facility had been rigged with enough explosives to reshape the planet's surface. But they weren't trying to destroy the world. They were trying to destroy us. Zethkar described the horror of watching asteroids launched from converted mining equipment. Massive chunks of rock accelerated by industrial machinery repurposed. For war, they turned the planet's mining facilities into the largest railgun in the system. Rocks the size of battleships, moving at near light speed, tearing through our formations like they were made of paper. The veteran's voice carried a note of grudging admiration. Quacks. So quarters are so tactical. So one are one to watch. So cops arrested. Rarawad. A hobbit rudges. A repit rawad. A pitchin' I'm on a rudda and I'm on a jadsaw. I'm sorry what I'm dress and so cabra and I'm sisenra I'm sis. No species had ever weaponized an entire planet's industrial infrastructure before. It violated every principle of civilized warfare. But surely your shields meant nothing against kinetic weapons moving that fast. A chunk of iron or traveling at 30% light speed doesn't care about your energy barriers. Zethkar's scarred arms gestured helplessly. We lost 6 ships in the first wave of attacks. 6 ships gone in minutes, because humans had turned rocks into bullets. The reporter's recording device captured every word as Zethkar continued, his voice growing more strained with each memory. The ground assault was worse. We landed expecting to face scared colonists with mining equipment. Instead, we found warriors who had spent generations learning to fight in the worst conditions imaginable. They fought with tools, with bare hands, with their teeth when necessary. Zethkar's compound eyes closed as he remembered the nightmare of urban combat in the mining facilities.
I watched a human female Lee continue operating artillery after.
Losing her arm to shrapnel, she used her remaining hand to load shells while blood pooled around her feet. When we finally overran her position, she was still firing. But surely superior technology gave you some advantage. Meant nothing, Zethkar interrupted, his voice sharp with remembered frustration. A human engineer named Choi took one of our plasma rifles, stripped it down, and rebuilt it into something that could punch through our heaviest armor. He did this while under bombardment, using parts from kitchen appliances. The veteran's voice carried a note of disbelief even now. Cycles later, kitchen appliances. A device for heating food, combined with our most advanced weapons technology, turned into something that could kill a Vorthok warrior in full combat armor. How is that possible? Humans don't think like we do. We see technology as something to be perfected, refined, made elegant. Humans see it as something to be broken down and rebuilt for whatever purpose they need. They don't care if it's ugly or inefficient, as long as it works. Zethkar's mandibles clicked as he remembered the chaos of the third wave. We captured a human medic during the assault on the main facility. Song was her name, a female with gentle hands and kind eyes. She treated our wounded without question, saved dozens of coalition lives. We thought we'd found one with honor. The reporter waited, sensing there was more to the story. She worked for 3 days, moving between our injured, administering their primitive medicines, comforting the dying. Our soldiers began to trust her, to believe that not all humans were monsters. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, heavy with the weight of betrayal. We were wrong. What happened? She was documenting our biology, learning our weaknesses. Every treatment she gave, every wound she tended, every moment of kindness was part of a larger plan. The medical supplies she used, she'd been turning them into chemical weapons the entire time. Zethkar stared at his hands, for scarred appendages that had once held weapons of war. When she escaped, she took that knowledge with her. Within hours, every human fighter on the planet had weapons specifically designed to target Vorthok physiology. The Cantina's silence stretched like a held breath. Even the mechanical synthesis units seemed to process the implications with something approaching horror. Our soldiers started dying in ways we'd never seen before. Weapons that specifically targeted our respiratory systems, our neural pathways, our reproductive organs. Song had learned everything she needed to know about our biology, and she'd shared it with every human on the planet. Zethkar's voice cracked with the weight of memory. That's when we realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting a species that had weaponized compassion itself. They could offer mercy with one hand, while preparing death with the other. The veteran lifted his glass with trembling hands. We pulled our forces out after losing half our ground. Troops. Commander Kim's final transmission was another smile and a single message. Thank you for the practice. We'll be ready for the next lesson. He drained the glass in one gulp. The synthetic alcohol burning like the memory of plasma fire. That's when we understood the truth. Humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to learn. Every battle, every defeat, every victory was just another step in their education. The reporter's tentacles curled around his recording device. Education in what? Zethkar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's neon lights like fractured mirrors. In how to kill anything that threatened them. And we had just volunteered to be their teachers. New Geneva was supposed to be our crowning victory. The voice turned hollow as he gestured toward the cantina's viewport, where distant stars twinkled like the eyes of forgotten gods. The veteran's forearms trembled slightly as he reached for his drink, the synthetic alcohol no longer strong enough to wash away the memories that haunted his dreams. 8 months. 8 months of hell, fighting an enemy that turned every advantage against us. His compound eyes reflected the neon lights like broken mirrors, each fragment showing a different piece of the nightmare he'd lived through. The reporter's recording device captured every word as Zethkar described the nightmare of urban warfare against humans who had prepared for the unthinkable. Around them, the cantina's other patrons had given up any pretense of not listening. Even the synthesis units had focused their optical sensors on the veteran, their mechanical forms somehow conveying rapt attention. New Geneva was their military command center, a city of 12 million humans built into the side of a mountain. From space, it looked like any other colonial settlement. Clean lines, efficient architecture, nothing that suggested the horror we were about to face. Zethkar's mandibles clicked as he remembered the orbital view. We brought everything. 700 ships, 2 million ground troops, enough firepower to crack a continent. The High Command wanted to make an example of human resistance. They wanted to show the galaxy what happened when a species refused to surrender. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Their military commander was General Yoon, a human who had studied every coalition defeat in history. She knew our tactics better than we did, had analyzed every weakness in our formations, every flaw in our strategy. How could a primitive species primitive? Zethkar's laugh was like grinding metal. They'd been fighting wars for thousands of years before we even knew they existed. While we were perfecting our elegant plasma cannons, they were learning to kill with rocks and sticks. While we developed our sophisticated battle tactics, they were discovering how to turn cities into death traps. The reporter's tentacles curled nervously around his recording device as Zethkar continued. General Yoon had turned New Geneva into a living weapon. Every building was a fortress, every street a kill zone, every citizen a potential combatant. The humans had spent decades preparing for this moment, hollowing out their city like a vast anthill. Zethkar's compound eyes closed as he remembered the first day of the siege. We started with orbital bombardment, targeting what we thought were military installations. The humans let us waste our ammunition on empty buildings while they're real. Command centers operated from tunnels carved into the mountain itself. Surely your ground forces walked into a nightmare. The veteran's voice carried the weight of memory like a physical burden. The moment our troops set foot in the city, they were surrounded. Not by armies, but by the city itself. Buildings that looked abandoned suddenly sprouted weapons. Streets that seemed clear became killing fields in seconds. Zethkar described the horror of urban combat where every shadow could hide an enemy, where every doorway could conceal a trap. We held the orbital space, controlled the skies, had them surrounded. It meant nothing. A human named Kong, just a maintenance worker, had turned the subway system into a supply network that our scanners couldn't detect. The reporter leaned forward, captivated by the impossible nature of what he was hearing. How is that possible? Humans don't think like we do. We see infrastructure as something to be protected, maintained, kept pristine. Humans see it as something to be used, modified, turned into weapons if necessary. Zethkar's scarred arms gestured helplessly. Kang had spent 20 years working in those tunnels. He knew every pipe, every cable, every maintenance shaft. When the siege began, he turned them into highways for human resistance fighters. The veteran's voice grew more strained as he continued. Our troops would secure a building only to find enemies emerging from ventilation shafts. They'd clear a street only to discover that the humans had been moving through the sewers beneath their feet. Every victory was temporary, every advance meaningless. The children were the worst part, Zethkar whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Human offspring, no older than Vorthok hatchlings, carrying messages through sewers under constant fire. They'd emerge from drain covers like ghosts, deliver intelligence to resistance cells, and disappear back into the tunnels. The cantina had grown completely silent now, even the mechanical hum of the station's systems seeming muted by the weight of the veteran's words. I watched a human child, couldn't have been more than 10 cycles old, crawled through a drainage pipe filled with toxic waste to plant explosives under one of our command posts. When the building collapsed, she was already gone, vanished into the labyrinth beneath the city. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in distress as he remembered the nightmare of fighting an enemy that included everyone, even the most vulnerable. There was an elderly human female limb. She operated a communication hub from her basement for 6 months. When we finally found her, she was 87 cycles old, had lost 3 limbs to bombing, and was still transmitting. What was she? Transmitting coordinates, troop movements, tactical information that kept the resistance one step ahead of us. The veteran's voice carried a note of grudging respect. She'd been broadcasting for months, right under our noses. Using equipment cobbled together from household appliances, the reporter's recording device hummed softly as it captured every word of the impossible story. But surely your technology meant nothing against pure determination. When we broke down her door, she was propped up in a chair, her remaining hand still typing on a keyboard made from salvaged parts. She looked up at us with eyes that had seen too much, smiled and said, I've been waiting for you. Zethkar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like fractured mirrors. The basement was rigged with enough explosives to level half the block. She'd been sitting on top of a bomb for months, ready to take us with her if we found her position. What broke your forces? The music. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in. Distress, the sound echoing through the silent cantina like a funeral dirge. Every night, as our soldiers tried to sleep in their armored positions, the humans would broadcast their songs, their poetry, their stories of survival. The veteran's voice grew quieter, heavy with the weight of psychological warfare that had shattered his troops' morale. It wasn't propaganda, it was something worse. Promises. Promises of what they'd do to anyone who threatened their young. Remember one song, Zethkar continued, his voice barely audible? A human female singing about a mother who would burn the galaxy to protect her children. Her voice was beautiful, haunting, and absolutely terrifying. Our soldiers began to break down, one by one, as they realized they weren't fighting an army. They were fighting a species that would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect their own. The reporter waited, sensing there was more to the nightmare. The broadcasts got worse as the siege continued. Stories of human mothers who had walked through fire to save their offspring. Tales of children who had fought monsters to protect their families. Each night, the humans reminded us that we were the monsters in their stories. Zethkar lifted his glass with trembling hands, the synthetic alcohol no longer enough to dull the pain of memory. Our soldiers started having nightmares, waking up screaming about human children with weapons in their hands. The psychological warfare was more effective than any plasma cannon. How did it end? with the realization that we were fighting a war we could never win, not because we lacked firepower, but because we couldn't break the human spirit. Every day we stayed, more of our soldiers broke down. Every night, the music reminded us that we were fighting a species that would rather die than surrender. The veteran's voice cracked as he remembered the final retreat. We pulled out with 30% of our forces remaining. The other 70% were dead, wounded, or too psychologically damaged to continue fighting. General Yoon sent us a message as we pulled back, her face appearing on our screens with that terrible human smile. What did she say? Thank you. For the practice, Zethkar's compound eyes closed as he remembered the final humiliation. She thanked us for teaching her people how to fight a galactic war. 8 months of hell, and they treated it like a training exercise. The cantina remained silent as the weight of the story settled over its patrons. Reporters recording. Device continued to hum, capturing the sound of a veteran's breathing as he struggled with memories that would haunt him forever. The counterattack came 18 months later, and Zethkar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he remembered. The day the galaxy changed forever, the cantina's neon lights flickered against his scarred exoskeleton, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of his memories. We thought we'd hurt them, set them back decades. The High Command was celebrating, declaring victory parades across Coalition space. Instead, we'd given them time to plan. His compound eyes stared into the amber depths of his drink, seeing reflections of battles that had redefined warfare itself. The reporter waited as Zethkar gathered his thoughts, the recording device capturing every pause, every breath, every moment of silence that spoke volumes about the horrors to come. Admiral Zhang led their fleet when they finally struck back, a human who had spent years studying our tactics, our technology, our psychology. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with something that might have been admiration mixed with terror. The first sign of trouble came when our own weapons began failing at the worst possible moments. The veteran's scarred arms trembled as he lifted his glass. A shield generator that flickered for just a moment during combat exercises. We thought it was normal wear and tear, the price of constant warfare, but it wasn't. A human named O had infiltrated our supply lines, introducing microscopic flaws that wouldn't manifest until combat. Every weapon we fired, every system we activated, had been subtly sabotaged months in advance. Zethkar's voice carried the weight of a warrior who had discovered his own equipment was his enemy. The reporter's tentacles curled around his recording device as he processed the implications. How is that possible? Humans think in timescales that would drive most species insane. While we planned our next battle, they were planning our next defeat. O had spent 3 years working his way through our manufacturing facilities, introducing flaws so subtle that our quality control systems never detected them. Zethkar described the horror of watching Coalition technology turn against itself in the heat of battle. Our plasma rifles would overheat at critical moments. Our shield generators would fail when we needed them most. Our targeting computers would develop glitches that sent our shots wide when victory seemed certain. The Battle of Proxima Station was when we first realized the scope of their infiltration. Our most advanced battleship, the Eternal Conquest, suffered a cascade failure that started with a single faulty circuit. Within minutes, the entire ship was dead in space, its crew trapped inside a metal coffin. The veteran's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like broken mirrors. That's when we discovered that human engineer Bay had reverse-engineered our plasma drives. But instead of copying them, she'd improved them. Their ships moved faster, hit harder, and required half the energy. How could a primitive species improve on Coalition technology? Because they don't think like we do. We see technology as something to be perfected, refined, made elegant. Humans see it as something to be broken apart and rebuilt for whatever purpose they need. Zethkar's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Bay took our plasma drives and turned them into something we didn't recognize. Crude, ugly, but devastatingly effective. The reporter leaned forward, captivated by the impossible nature of what he was hearing. But surely your intelligence services were compromised from the beginning? Zethkar's laugh was like grinding metal. A human named Shin had spent 15 years posing as a coalition sympathizer, slowly working his way up the ranks. When the war began, he was already in position to cripple our command structure. The veteran's voice grew more strained as he continued. Shin had been feeding us false intelligence for years, making us believe we understood human capabilities. While they learned everything about us, every battle plan we made, every strategy we developed, was already known to their commanders. But how did they infiltrate so deeply? Patience, Zethkar replied, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. While we planned in cycles, humans planned in generations. Shin had children during his deep cover mission, raised them too. Be coalition citizens, while secretly preparing them for the day when humanity would need their help. The cantina had grown completely silent now, even the mechanical hum of the station's systems seeming muted by the weight of the veteran's words. The Battle of Vorthok Prime lasted 3 days, and changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. Commander No led a human squadron that used our own defense satellites against us. It didn't just defeat us, they made it look effortless. Scars. Compound eyes closed as he remembered the nightmare of watching his homeworld's defenses turn against their creators. Our orbital platforms, designed to protect Vorthok Prime from invasion, suddenly began targeting coalition ships. The weapons we'd built to defend our most sacred world were being used to destroy our own fleets. The humans had spent months infiltrating our defense networks, not with crude hacking attempts, but with patient, methodical work that turned our own systems into weapons. Commander No didn't need to fight through our defenses. She had already converted them to her cause. The reporter's recording device hummed softly as it captured every word of the impossible story. How many ships did you lose? 80% of the home fleet in the first 6 hours? Ships that had defended the coalition for centuries? Destroyed by weapons they had trusted to protect them. Zethkar's voice cracked with the pain of memory. I watched the flagship Eternal Victory torn apart by its own escort vessels, their targeting systems reprogrammed to see coalition ships as enemy targets. The veteran's mandibles clicked in distress as he continued. But the worst part wasn't the destruction. It was the realization that the humans had been planning this for years, maybe decades. Every system failure, every technical glitch, every moment of doubt had been carefully orchestrated. They'd prepared for everything, Zethkar continued, his voice barely audible. For losing battles, for losing worlds, for losing Earth itself. Every defeat was just another data point in their planning, another lesson in how to turn our strengths into weaknesses.
Oh.
The reporter waited, sensing there was more to the nightmare. During the battle, I intercepted a human transmission. Commander No was talking to her officers, and she said something that chilled me to the core. She said, "Remember, we're not just fighting for victory. We're fighting to ensure that anyone who threatens humanity will never threaten anyone again." Zethkar lifted his glass with trembling hands, the synthetic alcohol no longer enough to dull the pain of memory. That's when we understood the truth. Humans hadn't been fighting to win the war. They'd been fighting to redefine what war meant. The counteroffensive spread across coalition space like a plague. Every world we thought was secure, every system we believed was safe, suddenly became a battleground. Human agents emerged from deep cover, sleeper cells activated, and our own technology turned against us. The veteran's voice grew quieter, heavy with the weight of defeat. We'd thought we were fighting a primitive species struggling for survival. Instead, we were fighting a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history preparing for this moment. The final transmission from Admiral Jang came after the Battle of the Core Worlds. She appeared on our screens with that terrible human smile and said, "Thank you for teaching us how to fight a galactic war. Class dismissed." Zethkar's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like fractured mirrors. That's when we realized we hadn't been fighting a war. We'd been attending a school, and humanity had been the teacher all along. The cantina remained silent as the weight of the story settled over its patrons. The sound of a veteran's breathing, the only thing captured by the reporter's device as he struggled with memories that would haunt him forever. The armistice talks were held on neutral ground, aboard the ancient space station Harmony Point, floating in the void between warring systems. Zethkar's voice carried the weight of finality as he described the moment when the galaxy's greatest military power knelt before a species they had dismissed as primitive. Ambassador Park sat across from our high command as if she were discussing the weather. No relation to the ship captain who had first defied us, but she carried the same steel in her spine. The veteran's compound eyes reflected the cantina's neon lights, showing glimpses of a memory that still haunted his dreams. The reporter's recording device captured every word as Zethkar described humanity's ultimate victory, a triumph that had nothing to do with weapons or fleets, and everything to do with the terrifying depth of human preparation. The High Command expected negotiations, terms of surrender, reparations, maybe the establishment of human reservations on distant worlds. Instead, Ambassador Park opened a briefcase and spread out star charts covering half the galaxy. Zethkar's mandibles clicked as he remembered the moment when everything changed. She explained it very simply, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. Humans had prepared for the possibility of losing Earth, losing everything. Hidden colonies scattered across unexplored systems, sleeper agents embedded in every major civilization, contingency plans spanning centuries. The veteran's scarred arms gestured helplessly. Even if we won, even if we glassed every human world and killed every human in known space, we would spend the rest of our existence looking over our shoulders. The revenge wouldn't come immediately. It would come in 50 years, 100 years, maybe 200, but it would come. The reporter leaned forward, his tentacles curling around his recording device. How could they plan so far ahead? Because they think in generations, not cycles. While we celebrated our victories, they were preparing for defeats that hadn't happened yet. Every human child born during the war had been given a name, a purpose, and a mission that might not activate for decades. Zethkar's voice dropped barely above a whisper. Ambassador Park showed us footage from their hidden colonies. Worlds we'd never heard of, systems our scouts had never explored. Entire civilizations of humans who had been preparing for this war since before it began. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the mechanical synthesis units, focusing their optical sensors on the veteran's words. Dr. Rue had calculated the economic cost of occupying human space. The resources required to suppress a species that refused to acknowledge defeat would bankrupt the coalition within 50 cycles. Zethkar's compound eyes closed as he remembered the moment when the High Command realized they had walked into a trap spanning centuries. But surely the Council could have what? Zethkar interrupted, his voice sharp with remembered frustration. Exterminated them? Commander Han had made it clear that humans had prepared for that too. Every human death would trigger automated responses across the galaxy. They'd weaponize their own extinction. The veteran's mandibles clicked in distress. As he continued, hidden facilities throughout Coalition space, programmed to activate if human populations drop below certain thresholds. Biological weapons tailored to specific alien physiologies, kinetic weapons hidden in asteroid fields. Sleeper agents with orders to activate only if their species faced extinction. The humans had turned genocide into a suicide pact that would take the entire galaxy with them. Ambassador Park explained it with the same calm voice she might use to discuss dinner plans. If you kill us all, she said, you'll spend the next 1,000 years dying slowly, wondering which of your trusted allies is really one of ours. The reporter's recording device hummed softly as it captured the impossible nature of what he was. Hearing, how could they hide so much from Coalition intelligence? Because they'd been preparing longer than we'd been watching. Every human exploration ship that had ever left Earth had carried more than just colonists. They'd carried seeds of revenge, planted in worlds so distant that our scouts had never found them. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, heavy with the weight of defeat. The final lesson came from Engineer KO. She'd been captured during the siege of New Geneva, held in our most secure facility for months. When we released her as part of the armistice, she thanked us. For what? For teaching humanity that they were alone in the universe, that no species could be trusted, no alliance was permanent, and that survival required absolute preparation. For every possibility, the veteran's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like broken mirrors. She said we'd given them the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that they could never be safe. The reporter waited, sensing there was more to the nightmare. KO explained that humans had always been paranoid, always been prepared for the worst. But the war had taught them that even their worst fears weren't terrible enough. They'd learned to plan for things they couldn't even imagine, to prepare for threats that didn't exist yet. Zethkar stood slowly, his movements still showing the phantom pain of old wounds that would never fully heal. The armistice wasn't a peace treaty. It was a promise that humanity would never again be caught unprepared, never again be vulnerable to those who would destroy them. The terms were simple. Coalition forces would withdraw from all human space. All human prisoners would be released. The galaxy would acknowledge that Earth was not just another world to be conquered, but a species to be feared. The veterans' voice cracked with the weight of memory. In return, humanity promised not to activate their contingency plans. The biological weapons would remain dormant, the sleeper agents would stay hidden, the automated revenge systems would stay offline. As long as no one threatened human extinction again, but what if someone does? Then the galaxy burns. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with finality. Ambassador Park made it very clear. The next species that threatens humanity won't get a war. They'll get extinction, swift and total and absolute. The veteran placed payment on the table, his scarred hands trembling slightly. We thought we were conquering a primitive species. Instead, we created something that will haunt the galaxy for generations. A species that learned to turn survival into an art form. The reporter watched as the veteran limped toward the exit, his forearms moving with the careful precision of someone who had learned to live with constant pain. Commander, one last question. Do you think humans are evil? Zethkar paused at the doorway, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's neon lights one final time. The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying star. Evil? No, humans aren't evil. They're survivors. And that's what makes them so terrifying. His voice carried the weight of a warrior who had learned to fear something worse than death, the knowledge that some species would do anything, sacrifice anything, become anything, to ensure their survival. Evil destroys for pleasure, for power, for conquest. Humans destroy for survival, for protection, for the future of their children. That's not evil, it's evolution. And we taught them to evolve beyond anything the galaxy has ever seen. He stepped into the corridor, leaving the reporter alone with his thoughts and the weight of a story that would reshape galactic understanding of the species that had emerged from the third planet of an unremarkable star. In the silence that followed, the cantina's other patrons slowly resumed their conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone had heard the story. Everyone now understood why the name human was spoken in whispers across the galaxy, why trade routes avoided human space, and why the Coalition's greatest victory had become its most terrible defeat. The reporter sat alone, staring at his recording device, knowing that he held the most important story in galactic history. A story about the day the galaxy learned that there were things worse than being conquered, being the one who taught your enemy exactly how dangerous they could become. Outside the cantina's viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the fears and nightmares of the species that crawled between them. But somewhere among those distant lights, humanity continued to prepare, to plan, to evolve into something that would ensure their survival no matter what the galaxy threw at them. The war was over. The real terror was just beginning.